Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice.
Adventure punishment, 19 years, Texas Department of Corrections.
Hello, I'm James Wilson. Cities and towns across the nation are struggling to deal with an explosion in the use and abuse of illegal drugs. Citizens are tired of having their streets overrun by drug dealers. In many communities, residents find their beleaguered police agencies cannot keep up with the expanding drug trade, much less eradicate it. So they are organizing and joining grassroots efforts aimed at taking back neighborhoods. In some cases, citizens patrol the streets like unofficially deputized police officers. They wear uniforms and carry walkie-talkies. In other places, citizens monitor crack houses and street corner drug bazaars. They bang pots and pans to disrupt drug deals. Some people worry that these activities could lead to vigilantism. Others fear that citizens face the threat of drug dealer retaliation. In many cities, however, police and citizen groups work together. In Philadelphia, a coalition of 80 neighborhood groups is waging a battle against drugs.
We're fired up, we ain't taking no more. We're fired up, we ain't taking no more. We're fired up, we ain't taking no more.
These citizens are determined to take back their streets from drug dealers. Armed with bullhorns and white hard hats, their strategy is simple. Stake out from dusk to dawn a street corner where drugs are sold, forcing the sellers and buyers to conduct their business somewhere else. Herman Rice, a longtime community activist, organized the city's first vigil in April 1989.
One of the things that the marches do is come directly to where the corners are, where the drugs are being sold. And that's where they take up residency for that evening. Rain, snow, sleet, whatever. That's what happens. And between now and sometime this morning, all drug traffic here will usually cease.
Neighborhoods throughout Philadelphia have been ravaged by drugs. This pair of tennis shoes hanging from a utility wire lets potential buyers know that crack is available on this corner.
How you doing, Miss Cunningham?
Officer Brenda Robinson-Stowe has worked Philadelphia neighborhoods for 8 years.
Drug situation in this district is horrendous. It's devastating. It's demolished so many neighborhoods, so many lives, and more important, so many children.
We have kids selling drugs out there right now, and we've buried in this church 38 murder victims in the drug scene just in the last few years. One of them was 12 years old, one was 14. The last one that we buried right before Christmas was 17 years old. He died with a gun in one hand and a bag of cocaine in the other hand.
It was concern for their children's and their own lives that prompted many citizens to become involved personally in the war on drugs, to see if together they could make a difference.
I registered my children to the Catholic school, and they had to walk from the school to home, and they were being, approached by the drug dealers and the druggies and everything.
We all felt so powerless before, that they controlled the streets, that even though we lived there, we had nothing to say about it.
They were worried about their kids, they were worried about the violence in the street, and they showed a real indication that they were willing to work closely with the police department. So as a result of what I saw in the group, I decided that I wanted to work with them.
But even with the cooperation and support of the police, critics fear that citizens who directly confront drug dealers and users may be putting their lives in danger.
Out here in the street, kill them little kids over there. $100 a day. If Dr. You take a chance on doing it, you take a chance on doing your life no matter what.
You have to let people know that there are risks involved in this, that there may be retaliation, that somebody may try to kill them. Now, the good side of that is it's been threatened numerous times. All of the people in MAD have been threatened numerous times. Nothing has ever happened. No direct retaliation, serious retaliation has ever occurred. The drug dealers haven't made good on their threats.
Critics also worry that the citizens, in their fervor to wipe out drugs, will step over the line from concerned community activists to vigilantes. Officer Robinson Stowe says that this is not a valid fear.
It's a very wide line between vigilantism and what this community does, simply because they're not out to hurt anyone. They're not taking the law into their own hands. They're not physically abusing anyone. They're just tired of being abused, and they have to make a stand, and that's all they're doing. They're just standing up, telling the world, we're tired, we don't want it anymore. And we'll stand down here, come hell or high water, to see that it stops in our community.
This way of combating drugs also draws opposition from another Philadelphia anti-drug group, which charges that groups like this don't and can't solve the problem. Drug marches are not the answer, according to Reverend Clarence Hester.
When they come in and take over a corner, true, the drug dealers leave their corner. But the reality of it is they move a block away or 2 blocks away. They put a kid on a bike. They let the kid ride around and direct the traffic. And the activity is still going on. So you're not taking a whole lot of money out their pocket.
The marchers and the police who work closely with them disagree. They say the demonstrations have hurt the drug dealers economically.
This is devastating to this neighborhood. Tonight could stop them, I'd say, $100,000 worth of drugs tonight can be stopped just because these people are out here.
If you were to total up all the nights that they've been at various places in this city and all the drug sales that they kept from happening, it probably runs into the millions of dollars.
In addition, police give the citizens credit for boosting narcotics arrests. Both citizens and police say their success in fighting drugs and cleaning up their neighborhoods is the result of their close cooperation, something that was unheard of just a few years ago.
Never in the history of Philadelphia did the community trust the police or the police trust the community. So we found something that was almost unbelievable, and from that we also found commitment and a desire to work with each other.
These days, the city of brotherly love boasts more than 60 neighborhood groups, totaling more than 2,500 people who are donning white hard hats and screaming into bullhorns, determined to do what they can to wipe out drugs.
If you do nothing, I'm sure you won't experience retaliation. But I'm not sure you won't die because of drugs in any one of 1,000 other different ways.
Drugs are killing neighborhoods. And it's got to stop. And it's the individual responsibility of everybody in America to fight the war on drugs. The old Black Panther slogan, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, well, that's true.
Joining us to discuss these issues are Herman Rice of the Philadelphia Anti-Drug Coalition and Mantua Against Drugs, Captain Gordon Harrison, commanding officer of the Newton Division, Los Angeles Police Department, and Professor Wesley Skogan of Northwestern University. Mr. Rice, Reverend Hester said that you're not solving the problem, you're just displacing it to another neighborhood. Is that true?
I'd say he's true. His statement could be considered factual in a lot of ways.
Now, what good does it do if you just move the drug dealing to another neighborhood? Won't it come back there? Is there any way to really put them out of business with community tactics?
I would assume that after we move them, the community in which they move to, it forces them to come out and also get involved. And what has taken place is that has happened in over 60, 70 places where the drug dealers and the traffic has been moved into their neighborhoods, and they've had to come out to respond to move them further. And what we found that we can't say we have totally solved any of the problems. We've just got people aware that if they are in their homes waiting for this miracle to come from police and heaven and Washington to solve the problem, then they're very sadly mistaken.
Do these other neighborhoods use the same tactics in their organizing efforts that you do? Marches, vigils, white hats? Is that the standard approach in most neighborhoods?
That's the approach, plus taking up after-school program with kids, working more closely with the police, getting out on during the day, cleaning their blocks, making sure that all unknown suspects are reported to police, cars with license plates that don't live there, all of that comes with it.
If you're hurting the drug trade, why is it that there haven't been so far any serious retaliation by drug dealers against community people?
I don't really have I couldn't give you a truthful answer. It hasn't happened. I'm going to theoretically say that it hasn't happened because I believe the drug trade people are under the impression if they did retaliate like they have done to, you know, some of their own or a lone person out there fighting, that the retaliation would be a lot greater than what they're getting now.
Can you sustain this kind of community activity over a long period? Some people have said that people will get involved for a brief period, but then they go back to jobs and work and family. What's the long-range prognosis?
Well, we've had this program working, say, 29 months or so, where people have been coming out daily and weekly. And on some cases, we have had people who have stopped, but other ones have joined. But I'd say the core of people who have been the real active people in the battle have stayed over this long haul. And of course it's tedious, and it's no pay, and of course it's dangerous, and they don't get any praise from neighbors. They get very little accolades from anybody. So it has to be a commitment of what's the worst, going back in the house and waiting to die from them coming in, or facing the battle in the street and dying there. So it's to that point.
How much of this effort depends on Herman Rice? You're obviously an extraordinarily talented community organizer. Can anyone do this, or does it take an unusual person like Herman Rice to make this work?
I don't think so. I think it takes a person who has a neighborhood that is really deteriorating. It's going to end up being an eyesore for the entire city. And they really have decided that they're not going to move any place. And they are the people that step forward. I found them in Atlanta that step forward. I'm not in Atlanta, and they're doing it there. I'm not in Salt Lake City, and they're doing it there. And I'm not in Camden, and they're doing it there. And then in about 60 other places in Philadelphia I'm not at, that they do it there.
Captain Harrison, you command an important district in the Los Angeles area. Do you see any kind of community organizing of the sort we've seen in Philadelphia occurring here?
Yes, not to the extent in Philadelphia. We have a group called the 100 Men, and it's administered by the Community Youth Gang Services, which is a county-funded organization. And they have patrols in the neighborhoods.
I see.
But not to the extent they have in Philadelphia. We also have a church group, St. Patrick's.
Now, in your division, the Newton Division in Los Angeles, you've initiated a program called Operation Cul-de-sac, where, as I understand it, you've barricaded off some of the streets, declared it a narcotics-free area. How did this work? Did you initiate it? Did the community initiate it? What has been the response?
Well, the police department initiated it. This particular area is 30 square blocks, and it was the highest crime area in my division. And we went in and surveyed the community, told them what we would like to do. We knocked on every door in the area. And we interviewed 560 people, and 558 of them approved of this program. Then we implemented the program on February 1st with a...
That was 1990?
Yes, this year. With a 2-day cleanup, facelift campaign. I brought in the garbage street maintenance department to clean up vacant lots, to do away with abandoned refrigerators and sofas, graffiti paint out, impounded all the abandoned vehicles, cleaned the streets. And then the program is primarily based on an old police tactic, and that is foot beats. I have foot beats in this area.
How many foot patrol officers have worked in this particular area during the project?
Right now I have a detail of 12 officers and a sergeant. And crime has been reduced in this area in the 3 months it's been in effect. And one of the major advantages that occurred, and we didn't even realize it, was that I have a high school in this area, and they have experienced 150 to 200 more students per day attending high school.
Why are the students intending in increased numbers?
They were interviewed, the principal tells me they were interviewed and asked that very question, and they said because they're not as afraid anymore to go to and from school.
Now, if you put in this police presence and the foot patrols and the barricades and the other activities, this costs money. Is the city willing to pay the bill for this kind of intensive effort in drug-infested neighborhoods?
Right now, the city is discussing the budget for 91, and preliminarily they are in favor of it because the community is so in favor of it. And we have also asked the state to contribute some funds for overtime, because the officers that I just described are all on an overtime basis.
So this isn't additional police officers, this is just officers working more hours per day on an overtime basis, is that right?
Exactly right, yes.
Now let me ask you the same question I asked Mr. Rice. You've reduced crime in that neighborhood. Have you reduced it permanently, or have you displaced that crime and that drug trafficking to other areas that you're responsible for?
Well, the crime is down generally throughout my division, and adjacent divisions' crime is also down, gang crime. And non-gang related crime also is down. So when I say that, I'm talking about violent crime. In fact, my gang-related murders are down 25%. And overall in the city, they're down about 14%.
Thank you. Wes Scogan, you are one of the country's leading academic authorities on community self-preservation and crime control efforts, and you've written someplace that crime is a very difficult issue around which to organize the community. Why is that?
Well, crime is a very difficult issue for a couple of reasons. One is that the enemy's elusive, and the second is it's difficult to win permanent victories. Unlike a bad building or a street corner that's in need of a stop sign, crime is a problem that keeps coming back, and you got to hammer it again next year and the year after that. And it's difficult to show that you're winning, and it's very difficult to sustain the effort to keep winning over the time, over years.
Do your criticisms apply, or your lack of optimism apply to the program that you've heard Herman Rice describe in Philadelphia? Do you think this is something that will weaken in time because people can't sustain the effort?
Well, what we saw, the confrontational tactics that we saw in Philadelphia are very dramatic. By and large, I think the evidence is that these kinds of things are very difficult to sustain, very difficult to keep going over time, very difficult to keep people involved, not generalizable to lots of parts of the community. And the displacement problem is one that governments and college professors really have to worry about. Pushing it into other people's neighborhoods is a very limited kind of success.
Well, what if the pushing it into the other neighborhoods has the effect that Herman Rice described? It induces those neighborhoods to organize as well. Is that a realistic prospect?
I'm not so sure they're likely to enjoy the opportunity that Herman creates for them. More likely, their neighborhoods are likely to succeed at a couple of other kinds of strategies that are more attuned to the kinds of things that community organizations have traditionally been successful at doing.
What are those?
One are things related to housing, to buildings, to zoning, to land use, and the second are youth programs, things aimed at kids, supporting kids in their families. I think that the housing programs and the youth programs are things that are more attuned to what traditional organizations have been successful at doing and what community organizers know how to do pretty well.
Now, you mentioned earlier that one of the problems in organizing around the crime issue is that it's such a continuous problem. There aren't any easy, permanent victories. But suppose a neighborhood group succeeds in closing down a crack house where rock cocaine is sold. Wouldn't that constitute a visible victory, like putting up a stop sign, something they could take pride in and that might either help the organization continue or discourage drug trade in the long run?
That's exactly right. The thing about a building, a house, an apartment building, there's a landlord, there's someone to be held responsible. You can use eviction, you can treat it as a health and safety matter, and there's lots of legal handles to deal with buildings like that. Once you've succeeded in turning the building around, you've won a fairly permanent victory, and that becomes, as you say, a symbol of success, and the organization can point to it as a success. A cleaned up block, it looks better, and life there is better.
A national survey has recently stated that 7% of all adults living in cities belong to a neighborhood watch program. They're very common. The viewers of this program know what they are. Are these people wasting their time because they're joining an organization that really can't accomplish anything?
No, Neighborhood Watch has some very useful features. Lots of Neighborhood Watch programs are very involved in partnership organizations with police in terms of identifying hot spots, observing drug trafficking, establishing patterns, providing information, and also simply agitating for more police support. It's really because communities really do need the support of the police in dealing with drug-related crime, where there's lots of violent and well-organized people involved on the other side.
Herman, you've heard Professor Scogan give the reaction of a scholar to these programs viewed nationally. Is his somewhat pessimistic view borne out by your experiences in Philadelphia and other cities?
I'd say what he said has a lot of merit. I've seen people to fold under the pressure, but I've also seen something different due to this drug trade, that what was normally crime before, that you had to worry about it, you know, from gunshots, you know, people being robbed. Well, this drug trade has moved into the home. It's taken the daughters, the children. It's starting the senior citizens from flowing. It has police on edge. It has the city budgets all fired up. It has people talking about National Guard. They're talking about barges. It has infused people to do something a little different, a little longer.
What about this strategy of identifying crack houses and boarding them up or closing them down? Have you tried that in Philadelphia?
We've boarded 2,015 houses. We've been able to, each one of those groups do boarding of houses. We take the school kids and we do the boards in the classrooms. They put slogans on them, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. On Saturdays, the men and the kids go out and they board these houses. So it's 60 groups boarding houses on an average of 3 or 4 a weekend.
Captain Harrison, in many communities, the neighborhoods where drug trafficking occurs and the police have often had poor relations or suspicion on both sides. Has this been your experience, that there's a problem in generating mutual confidence between community groups and the police, or is that not a real problem?
No, that's not a real problem in Los Angeles, particularly now that we have more footbeats out there. We've had the Neighborhood Watch program for years in Los Angeles, so that the communication between the police and the community has not been a problem.
What happens when the Los Angeles Police Department sends in a large number of officers on a weekend to provide saturation patrol in a drug or gang area? This is not Operation Cul-de-sac, this is a different tactic. What has been the effect of that? What has been the community response to that?
The community response generally has been positive. There have been instances where we've taken rock houses and gotten standing ovations by the other residents on that block, people literally applauding as we're taking suspects away. And these task force operations have had a very positive effect in lowering the apprehension of the community.
But many of the people you take off the streets on a weekend saturation patrol are back on the streets very shortly, because many of them are either not arrested for serious crimes, or if they are, the criminal justice system doesn't have the capacity to send them away immediately. So that, would it be fair to say that this saturation patrol to some degree is running a revolving door? Would that be unfair?
No, that's absolutely accurate. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's just insufficient cell space in the jails in the Los Angeles County to accommodate these people.
So, but the revolving door, in your view, has some advantage, even though it doesn't result in people going away to prison for long periods of time.
Yes, it does.
And what is that advantage? What does it do?
Well, one thing, it lets the community see that their taxes are working for them. It lowers their fear level within the community. That's fairly well established.
Professor Scogan, is that well established, that if you have community organizing, or if you have saturation patrol or Operation Cul-de-sac, does that reduce the community's fear of crime?
There's no question that communities like to see police out there. They like to see police out in the neighborhoods. I'm a little dubious sometimes of saturation patrol tactics. In some cities, in some places, although perhaps not in Los Angeles, they can turn into real confrontations between police and citizens. You can lean too hard on communities, and when people who aren't involved in crime, who don't think of themselves as criminals, start getting leaned on and aggressively stopped in the street, they can be very unhappy as a result. There's other ways that you can put police visibility into communities. Foot patrol, programs to gather information from community residents and officers working together as teams to try to solve neighborhood problems, storefront offices, a whole package of stuff in the community policing area that may be just as effective in terms of showing taxpayers that officers are at work, and maybe just as effective at getting police visibility out in the streets. It doesn't generate the high volume of arrests that we've talked about, but we've also talked about how that's not a very productive way to go in many ways.
Let me ask Herman Rice, have the police in Philadelphia used any of the methods described by Professor Scogan or Captain Harrison in your city? Saturation patrol, knocking down rock houses, etc., or do the police simply go along with you in your own community organizing efforts?
Well, I found that our police department has been able to adapt all of these particular programs. Many cases where our groups are not. See, we're not totally all over the city, where there's places where there's no community activity. Mm-hmm. The tactics about blocking the area, saturation at times, seems to have had a lot of positive effect, as the fact that they do come out. But neighbors feel better that they see something happening. Something maybe 10 years ago where the police would come and the neighbors say, here they are picking on little Johnny, and here they are with their blackjacks and they're beating people. Well, they have found that maybe these tactics that would have been unpopular 10 years ago are very popular now.
Have you managed to build real bridges with the police and overcome some of this older police community tension that you've mentioned?
Well, I found out it was 50% on both sides of acting. See, there's a lot of actors in the world, and we've been able to know how to get the police away from you by creating a lot of noise and saying that they are picking on you. And there has been some bad police people that have precipitated this. But it's come to a point where no one can do that anymore, because the drug dealers and the criminals could care less about either one.
Thank you, gentlemen. Unfortunately, our time is over. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. For Crime File, I'm James Wilson.
Crime File is a production of CF Productions Incorporated, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice, research arm of the U.S. Department of Justice.